Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Today, we're diving into something that I think we can all relate to, and that's this feeling of identity overload.
Absolutely.
It's this pressure to be everything to everyone. You have to be the perfect parent, the super successful employee, the witty friend.
Right.
And somewhere in there, you're trying to figure out who you actually are.
Yeah. Right.
So for this deep dive, we've got a really interesting stack of sources, some psychology, some sociology, even a little bit of philosophy. And we're going to try to unpack this whole idea of identity overload.
It's a big one.
It is a big one. Where does this pressure come from? How is it impacting us? And most importantly, how can we navigate this to try to live, a more authentic life?
How can we be ourselves?
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So one of the books we have is Quiet by Susan Cain.
Ah, Quiet.
And she actually traces this whole identity overload thing back to a historical shift that happened, believe it or not, around the 1900s. So before that, Western society was really focused on those inner virtues, things like integrity and honor,
Right, being a good person.
Yeah.
Upright.
Exactly. But then around the turn of the century, things started to change.
So what happened?
Well, I mean, it wasn't like overnight. It wasn't like someone flipped a switch or anything. But what we see is figures like Dale Carnegie start to rise in prominence. And he wrote these self-help books.
Ah, Dale Carnegie, yeah.
And he really started to emphasize outward charisma, influence.
So it wasn't about being good anymore. It was about appearing successful.
Right. And being magnetic, dominant, Those became the aspirational qualities.
Which makes me think about today, right? Social media.
Absolutely.
And how everybody's got to build this personal brand.
It's all about personal branding.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, outward appearance, but it's also, how you present your personality. Right?
Yeah, totally.
And Cain really attributes this shift to the rise of mass media as well.
Yeah.
You had movie stars, advertising. All of a sudden, you had these images of what's desirable being thrown at you constantly. And that's really when the extrovert ideal was born.
This ideal that we're all supposed to be outgoing and, super social all the time.
Yeah. And it's still with us today.
Big time.
Yeah. And it made me think about the part in Cain's book where she talks about going to a Tony Robbins seminar.
Oh, yeah. Those are high energy events.
Yeah. And she talked about how she felt this immense pressure to match that level of enthusiasm.
To perform in a way.
Yeah. Even though, that really wasn't her natural personality. I don't know. Have you ever felt that? You have to sort of be the life of the party.
Totally. It's like you're at a party and you just kind of want to have a deep conversation,
Right.
in the corner with someone.
Yeah.
But you feel this pressure that you have to be the center of attention or people are going to judge you.
It's like this inner tug of war between wanting to be yourself and wanting to fit in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's something we all struggle with. So Cain talks about this idea of the old brain versus the new brain.
Okay. Fill me in. Is this a literal thing?
Not literally, no.
Okay.
But it's this framework for understanding how our primal instincts, which is what she calls the old brain, are constantly battling with our rational, conscious decision-making, which is the new brain.
So the old brain wants us to just go for it, seek that reward.
Exactly. It's that instant gratification. The new brain is saying, hey, hold on a sec, let's think this through.
Interesting. So how does this play out in our everyday lives?
Well, Cain suggests that extroverts might be a little bit more sensitive to that buzz from the reward system.
So they thrive on that external validation.
Yeah, exactly. Think of your classic life of the party. They get energy from that.
Yeah.
But, that doesn't mean introverts are immune to it.
Right.
And this whole idea kind of made me think about the Enron scandal.
Oh, wow. Okay. How so?
So Cain brings this up. And she argues that the introverted nerds, who are actually the ones who saw the financial risks,
Right.
they were totally ignored in favor of these charismatic rainmakers.
It's like they were so focused on projecting this image of success that they missed the warning signs.
Right. And it really highlights how identity overload can have these really serious consequences.
Absolutely.
I mean, it makes you wonder, are we so caught up in projecting this image that we lose sight of our own values?
Yeah. Big questions.
Yeah. And another book we've got that kind of goes even deeper into all this is You Are Not So Smart by David McRaney. Have you read that one?
I have.
It's a good one.
It's a good one.
And he talks about this idea of priming.
Priming, yeah.
Where basically things that we don't even really realize can influence our thoughts and our behavior.
So it's like these subtle cues in our environment that shape how we think and act.
Yeah.
It's kind of spooky when you think about it.
Yeah. It's a little unsettling, right? It's
Yeah.
like, so are we really in control of how we think and act?
Right. How much free will do we really have?
Yeah,
If
exactly.
we're being influenced by things we don't even realize.
Right. And McRaney actually highlights this really interesting experiment. It's called the split brain experiment.
Oh, wow. I've heard about that.
So it was done with these patients who had their brain hemispheres disconnected.
Okay.
And basically what they found was that these patients would do things, make choices, but then they would rationalize those choices without actually knowing the real reason behind them.
It's like they were making up stories to explain their own behavior.
Yeah. And it really makes you question how much of who we are is a result of our conscious choices and how much is just shaped by these forces that are, kind of beyond our control.
Big questions about free will and identity.
Yeah, exactly. And this leads us to another idea that McRaney explores, which is this concept of selling out.
Selling out, okay.
And he basically suggests that our desire for external validation, our need to belong, can actually lead us to compromise who we really are.
So it's like we put on this mask to fit in.
Yeah, exactly. Even if it means rejecting parts of ourselves.
And he talks about how this plays out in countercultural movements too. These groups that start out rejecting mainstream values.
Right. They want to be authentic, be different.
But then they end up creating their own sets of rules and hierarchies. It's like this need to conform is just like baked into us.
So we're all just like stuck in this endless loop of trying to conform to something, even if it's like a countercultural ideal.
It's a tricky thing, but the key is awareness, right?
Right.
The more we understand these forces that are shaping us, the more we can make conscious choices about who we want to be.
Instead of letting those external pressures define us.
Exactly.
So it's not about giving in to despair, but about empowerment, that we actually do have some control over how we respond to these pressures.
Absolutely. We have more power than we think. And one of the books that really dives into this idea of empowerment is The Courage to be Disliked.
Okay, The Courage to be Disliked
It's by Ichiro, Kishimi, and Fumitake Koga.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
It's based on Adlerian psychology, and it offers a very different perspective on how we approach these challenges.
Okay, so what's the Adlerian approach all about?
Well, one of the core principles is this idea that we're not defined by our past experiences.
So you're saying it's not all about, like, childhood trauma and all that?
It's not to say those things don't matter, but Adlerian psychology really emphasizes the present moment and our goals for the future.
Okay, so it's more forward-looking.
Exactly. So instead of saying, I'm insecure because of something that happened in my childhood, the Adlerian approach would be to say, okay, I'm choosing to be insecure right now because it's serving some purpose in my life.
That's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
Yeah. It is, but it can be incredibly liberating. We're not prisoners of our past. We have the power to choose how we respond, even to deep-seated emotions.
I like that. But how does this all tie back into identity overload and this idea of the courage to be disliked?
Well, one of the key concepts in Adlerian psychology is this idea of the separation of tasks.
Separation of tasks.
Yeah. It basically means that we're only responsible for our own actions and choices. We're not responsible for the expectations or judgments of other people.
So it's about setting boundaries in our relationships.
Exactly. And that takes courage, right? Because it means accepting that we might not be liked by everyone.
Yeah, that could be tough.
It can. The book actually has this really great anecdote about a young man who's a librarian.
Okay.
And he's really struggling because he wants to pursue a different career path. But he's afraid of disappointing his parents who have these expectations for him.
I can totally relate to that feeling of wanting to please your loved ones, but also wanting to honor your own path.
It's a universal struggle. And the courage to be disliked is about prioritizing your own values and goals, even if it means facing disapproval.
It's about saying, this is who I am, take it or leave it.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that you can't please everyone all the time.
And sometimes you have to make choices that might even make people angry or upset.
Right. But it's about staying true to yourself.
And that makes me think of Viktor Frankl and his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He went through unimaginable suffering in a Nazi concentration camp.
Oh, yeah. Frankl's story is incredible.
But he still found a way to hold on to his sense of self.
He talks about how even in the most horrific circumstances, we still have the freedom to choose our attitude, to find meaning.
And it's not just this vague, abstract meaning. He found purpose in caring for others. Even in the camp, he used his skills as a psychiatrist to try to help alleviate suffering.
One of the most powerful parts of the book is when he talks about having the chance to escape.
Right. He had an opportunity to get out.
but he chose to stay with his patients. He felt a sense of responsibility to them.
Wow. That's really powerful.
It shows that meaning isn't something that's just given to us. It's something that we create through our choices and actions.
Even when we're facing incredibly difficult situations.
Exactly. And I think that connects back to this whole idea of identity overload. When we're so caught up in external pressures and expectations, we lose sight of what truly matters to us.
Right. We forget what gives us meaning.
But when we connect with our values, our purpose, that's when we can start to navigate those pressures. That's how we find our own internal compass.
So it's not about finding one true meaning that's going to stay with us forever.
Right. It's about making choices that align with what we believe in, even if those beliefs evolve over time.
It's about being authentic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when it comes to feeling overwhelmed by all the choices and expectations, that's where our last book, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, really comes in handy.
Okay, The Untethered Soul. Yeah, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now, so this sounds timely.
Yeah, this book offers a perspective that's less about doing and more about just being.
Okay, being, not doing.
He uses this really interesting analogy of the mind being like a room.
Okay, our room.
And our thoughts and emotions are like guests that come and go.
Oh, I like that.
So instead of getting caught up in every thought and feeling, we can learn to observe them without judgment, like watching clouds drift by.
It's like creating some space between yourself and all that mental chatter.
Exactly. And Singer argues that this practice of detachment can lead to a sense of inner peace and freedom from those overwhelming feelings.
It's really about changing our relationship to our thoughts and emotions. Not trying to suppress them, but just seeing them from a different perspective.
Exactly. And that's where practices like meditation and mindfulness can be so helpful. You know, Singer really emphasizes those in the book.
Because they help us create that space.
Yeah. They help us cultivate that awareness. And he also talks about this idea of removing the thorns.
Removing the thorn.
Well, it's about freeing ourselves from past pain and conditioning by choosing not to identify with it.
So it's like acknowledging those past hurts, but not letting them define who you are today.
Exactly. And that's a process, right? It's not like you just flip a switch and suddenly you're free from all your baggage.
Yeah, it's ongoing work.
But the more we practice, the more we can let go of that need to control everything, to have all the answers.
So it's about accepting uncertainty, being present in the moment, not dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
It's about finding that freedom in the now. And I think that's a really powerful message.
It is. It feels like we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from those societal pressures to the power of the unconscious, and then the importance of meaning and letting go. It's clear that this whole idea of identity overload is a complex issue with no easy answers.
It really is. But I think one of the key takeaways here is that navigating identity overload is a journey, not a destination.
Yeah. It's not about arriving at some perfect final version of yourself.
It's about constantly evolving, learning, and growing.
And it's okay to feel lost or uncertain along the way. That's part of the process.
Absolutely. Embrace the messiness of it all.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. If you could let go of one expectation or pressure that's weighing on you, what would it be? Just imagine the freedom that could come from releasing that burden.
It's a powerful question to consider. And remember, true freedom doesn't lie in trying to conform to someone else's idea of who you should be.
It's about embracing that unique and wonderful complexity of who you truly are. And that's something worth celebrating.
Absolutely. Keep questioning, keep discovering, and keep diving deep.